Great. Well, look, thanks, Dan, for inviting me to talk to everyone here a little bit around some of our experiences, and some of my personal thoughts around sort of how do we kind of adapt and maximise the changes in a pandemic or post-pandemic world. We've all experienced this together and had to adapt pretty quick. So before we kind of dig into the sort of the main presentation. This is me, 20 years odd experience in IT, typically sort of delivering IT transformation, digitization, fairly complex solutions and products and services. My experience before Stars Group, where I kind of joined as the Associate Director of Engineering just over a year ago, has predominantly been in financial services. So a lot of work with large retail banks, kind of business outsourcing processes, etc. So this is kind of I'm fairly new to sports betting, so it's a very interesting industry. Lots of different types of challenges to solve, and in my role, I kind of look after I guess three major areas around our UK trading capability, our group trading capability, and our sportsbook capability, and that's across two main sites, Leeds and Sofia, which is in Bulgaria. So around about, I can't keep count of it, but it's around about 200 engineers. And I guess for me, my background is a software engineer. I spent the first half of my career sort of, knocking out code and doing all that kind of good stuff. And then, but I'm very passionate about technology and, really enjoy building great software. So I guess when I was chatting to Dan, about a month or so ago, it was around what topics might be interesting. So we kind of kicked a few ideas around, but I guess there's a few questions that I'm interested in is around how you maximise the change in working practice, which is around can we be truly pandemic proof? I think there's a whole ton of variables involved in that. With a stable and productive remote workforce, kind of what is the new norm? What does that look like? And I think that's going to be different for depending on the industry or the types of organisation, and then actually how do we use this as a bit of an opportunity to maximise how we change our working practices? Are there future opportunities around where we get talent, our productivity levels, innovation, etc.? So those are kind of the kind of some of the interesting areas that I could see as more discussion points going forward. But if I just kind of rewind the clock a little bit around what I've called sort of pandemic proof, and certainly these are the challenges we had to deal with. It's not exclusive, but these are kind of the headline ones. But so obviously we were kind of asked to leave at the offices before official lockdown. I think it was about a week before, so sort of mid March. And I guess the three areas that we'd had problems to solve, small problems to solve, were around sort of equipment and tooling, our teams and how we collaborate, and then how do we keep close eye on productivity and engagement. So I guess around equipment and tooling, I'm sure everyone's experienced this, but new starters and onboarding. So we had offers in where we had people who hadn't quite started yet, so we had to get those guys in, onboard them, get them part of the team, and obviously subsequently we've onboarded new starters. We were very fortunate that our business hasn't had too much of a challenge in terms of the result of the pandemic. We've been pretty resilient, so which is great. But we obviously had to deal with how do we, whilst we had a bit of a recruitment pause, we still had people to onboard. We've had to make sure that we had our corporate network access across site was set up correctly and working, so there was a little bit of work around that. And then obviously a lot of people were home working, so we had to kind of get the equipment out to people. Everyone's home working setup is very different. Mine's not great. I don't have a dedicated office space, so how does that work, and what are the things that you might not necessarily you might have taken for granted in the office aren't necessarily there as part of your home working setup. And then crucially, we didn't have a policy around home working, so these are the things we had to fairly rapidly get into place. I guess the other leg around challenges, whilst those other ones are probably more logistical, was around general sort of teams and collaboration. So for us, sort of that initial phase of lockdown was really around making sure that we had very clear communication out to the tribe, and decisions could be ratified and executed quickly. So it was because obviously things were moving at a reasonable pace. We had a multitude of video conferencing tooling available. So there was a bit of a distillation down to our preferred tooling. So we like the tool we use now, we use Zoom, I think, as our de facto. Obviously we have Teams, and we had bits of Skype and Slack, but Zoom seems to work the best. In terms of whiteboarding, we've opted to use Miro. I'm sure people have kind of used Miro. It's a really, really powerful tool. And again, with a bit of practice and just the teams have adapted to using Miro very, very well. And then ways of working, we kind of just had to tweak a little bit around the edges in terms of that. We operate, our tribes are agile in the truest sense. So it wasn't a big shift away in terms of when the whole tribe is remote working, to kind of still instill our process and best practice around agile ways of working. Our only real challenge was moving some of our physical boards into the digital realm, which again, we solved pretty quickly. I guess the third area where I get not so much challenges, but things that we kind of were very conscious around were generally around productivity engagement. So the hypothesis at the time is, right, if everyone's going to remote work, potentially people are going to go off sick, we don't know what's going to go on. We're going to see a dip in our productivity. Our engagement with our people is going to suffer. So these were kind of the ideas that were milling around. But as it turns out, that wasn't the case, which was a pleasant surprise. So, but we use various tools to kind of keep a close eye on that. So we've got very comprehensive squad metrics that we can dig into the nth degree of detail around various aspects of productivity, whether we're looking at our cycle times or our velocity, etc. Our team health, all those kind of good things. We also sort of complement how we understand what's going on with our squads with a tool called Office Vibe that looks at about 10 different sort of metric points around anything to do with relationships, feedbacks, alignment, happiness, satisfaction, ambassadorship. And again, that gives us a little bit of an insight into how people are feeling and what's going on. But we found that actually we didn't take too much of a hit. We took a bit of a dip sort of first month, and then I think everyone kind of found their groove and the cadence got into a good ways of working. And actually in most areas probably improved in areas of productivity. The other thing we were particularly conscious around was being really flexible. So for some of our team members, they've got young families, so you kind of juggle sort of homeschooling and doing the day job. So we have some people kind of working some various odd hours. So again, having flexibility is a kind of a key tenet in terms of new ways of working was quite important. And then we ran a load of initiatives around general sort of well-being and health, which again was, I think, really, really well received by the tribe, and it's a thing initiative that we're still running with. We have seen, and I'm sure other areas of the audience will have seen this, in terms of burnout. So gets Zoom fatigue, etc. And I know personally for me, I'm not a great example. I'll probably just replace my commute with more work, but I think that there is a bit of an element of potential for burnout. So we've tried to make sure that we're messaging around taking adequate breaks, etc., and managing that work-life balance quite well. And then the only other sort of area we had a bit of a challenge is just effectively what was a backlogging of holiday. So which the breaks have come off that a little bit, but obviously during lockdown, you're not necessarily going to want to take holiday, especially where there's nowhere to go. Clearly, we've got a lot of projects and work stream items running. So what we didn't want happening is obviously everyone disappearing in November or December. So we've managed to smooth that a bit, but again, it's just an area that we were conscious of. So those are kind of the key challenging areas for us. Nothing major. It was more, I guess, refining and tweaking around the edges of existing processes. So I guess, what did we learn? We've got run books now in place, so we've got pre-prepared comms and FAQs. So, you know, if, and hopefully we won't, but perhaps we will, there'll be if we go back in the office as a second wave, then we've got stuff ready to go. We're very much on top of the metrics in terms of our squad productivity, so keep a very close eye on that. And when we start to deviate around any of those areas, we can kind of hone in and take sort of effective action or mitigating steps. We've got much better tooling in place. Our tooling before was not as good. I think it's much better now, and it's also a lot more people are unified in using the same types of tool, which helps. We've done some real sort of basic stuff around ways of working in terms of simple things around meeting guidelines, and improving our communications, moving more to an asynchronous way of working. And again, as I touched on, sort of driving a lot of good people culture initiatives. We've seen a few areas, as I said, mentioned just holiday backlogging, but a little bit around health and safety. So, we've just, as I said, some people's setup at home isn't great. So, we've tried to mitigate that as much in terms of, we can issue the right type of ergonomic kit or chairs, etc., or desks. But clearly, obviously, space is a constraint for some people. And then I think just longer term, and I think it's too early for us to say yet, is actually, is there a longer term negative impact around some of our staff well-being? Right now, the data would say no, but it's something that I'm acutely aware. But I guess the kind of the summary piece for me is that we've come back a lot stronger as a tribe. I think we're much more unified. There are bits that we miss, and I'm sure you guys will have experienced the same, but overall I think we're much more stronger, much more resilient. So I guess that's kind of in the past, and just shared with you a little bit around some of the challenges we faced and what we learned. For me, what's more interesting is, okay, so what is this new norm? We hear it kind of talked about in the press or in various articles. So I guess I picked these images when I was putting the slides together, in terms of, we've got on the far right with the guy on the beach is, probably a very much idyllic but unrealistic way of remote working. The image on the left is probably where we'd all like to get to. Some of us might already have that. So we've got some kind of home-based office setup and the option perhaps to have something similar in a shared office environment. And then we've probably got quite a few people, which the guy in the middle looking after the two young children, they're having to balance not an ideal setup at home, perhaps not going back into the office yet. So there's a whole bunch of challenges with that. So understanding what the new norm is, and then I guess what are the good plus points around that, and what perhaps are the bad points, and then how do we use this as an opportunity to do things a little bit differently. So for me, what's good, certainly is I look after a whole bunch of engineers. We're continually growing. We having access to a wider talent pool is going to be great. So I'm a massive believer in building high performing teams. You get out what you put in. So having access to a wider talent pool where we can have effectively a remote first policy is hugely important. So that means that we are not necessarily confined to the commute distance to the Leeds office or the commute distance to the Sophia office. So that opens up a whole wider pool of people, which is fantastic. I think we're seeing improved productivity. The data is suggesting that to me. So, whilst we had a little bit of a dip, the squads have found their cadence. We're starting to see much better levels of productivity from speaking to the various guys in the team, and we've done some various surveys, etc. They're enjoying the way they're working. Clearly, there's obviously delivery pressures on what we're doing, but we're certainly seeing improvements in productivity. My only question that I haven't really dug into it, we see an improvement in productivity, but we've got effectively longer working days. I know we have in some areas. We did a load of wellbeing initiatives. We're certainly, I think, feedback from some of the surveys we've run is that the squads are having an improved work-life balance. There's a few pockets where it's not a uniform across the board, but overall people are swapped that commute time, that packed train or sitting in the car for a bit more time for themselves to do other things, whether that's going out for a run or doing cooking, etc. So we're seeing good positive moves there. Me myself, I've swapped the commute because I've got a longer working day, but at least I I'm kind of can finish usually around sort of 6:30 or so, and I don't have that commute back. I can use that extra time to do something, go for a run or do something that I enjoy. I guess in terms of what I see as the new norm, and this is kind of moving into a remote work, a remote first, so more of a hybrid model of working, is what are the negatives. So certainly for me, and I think anyone probably in a more of maybe a managerial leadership position, is around how just fostering the relationships and those chance encounters. I think chance encounters certainly spans across the board, but I certainly miss being able to just, be at the coffee machine, having a chat with the guys around what they're doing, what they're up to, either in work or as a casual conversation, or, what's going on outside of work. So it's a little bit more difficult for certainly my role, where my sphere is shrunk a little bit. I deal obviously all the time with my senior leaders, my engineering managers, my heads of, etc. I'm certainly spending less direct time in a two-way conversation with the guys who are building our software. Yes, I'll talk to them, but it seems to be more on here's a one-way communication rather than having those sort of more conversational conversations. And I think the other thing that I think that we will miss is those chance encounters, which for me are kind of where you get sparks of, if you can get people to kind of have those chance encounters and collaborate, that's where maybe some of those sparks of innovation happen. And so I think we lose that in this kind of remote working world. And the other thing is that longer term is what happens to our culture. So I think it's great that we've got really strong teams, well knit, but these guys and girls, they all know each other. They've worked with each other for quite some time. So those kind of bonds are already there. And we have onboarded people, remotely, but I think longer term, unless we move to kind of a bit of a mixed model, I would be thinking that our culture would deviate from what it is at the moment, and not in a positive way. So, and again, I'm a big supporter of, a people first culture. It needs to be a great place to work. And then I guess the other piece is just around longer term burnout. Again, we've got a lot of work going on in terms of across our squads. I'm acutely aware that some of the guys have been working much longer hours than they probably would have been if they had been in the office. So it's one to watch, that we're making sure that our people are taking sort of adequate breaks and are not doing 12-hour days, etc., or even working on the weekend. So those are the things where I think the areas we need to watch in terms of what would be the new norm. But I guess the thing that interests me the most is around, well, how do you kind of maximize the change? So there's and I've got sort of 4 headline areas around here. So certainly what I would like us to be doing and will be doing is adopting a remote first approach when it comes to our ways of working. So tons of positives around that, and we've been successful so far. We won't be going back into the office until early next year. We've got a phased return to the office for people who really need to be in the office for various reasons. But that's going to be capped at so many people. But the bulk of my teams will be still remote working, and but come 2021, I want to make sure that, when we're bringing on new people, it's done so in a remote first fashion, so we can access that wider talent pool. I know sort of engineers, it's high on the priority list of having that kind of remote working as an option, but but we equally need to have some flex where we're going to be in the office at times for various activities. So that's where I think that remote first approach is going to give us a positive and I think an advantage longer term. I think it's crucially important you get the mix right. And I think that's an area that is still needs to kind of be discovered and evolve. So what is the right mix around when do we need to be back in the office, and how do we work? Is that, we're doing a planning session, or, we want to do the stand up, or maybe we're just doing something that's, kind of more workshoppy, but how do you get that right mix in terms of when people are coming into the office, and if a squad's coming into the office, does it make sense that some of them are still sitting at home versus three? And those are the things we need to kind of work out and put into practice. So I think that's still going to be, when we get back into the office, is going to be a point of learning for us. I'm sure there's people in the audience who have already kind of got through some of this, so I'd be interested to understand, how they found that. And then I guess the final point on this kind of remote first approach is ultimately we're going to have a level of tailoring around that. So for some people, it's not going to be right. So we just need to tailor our approach around ways of working, etc. And then I guess the other piece in terms of how to maximise the change is around, flexibility and collaboration. So fluid working arrangements, so a move away from where we have our core operating hours. Well, yes, but actually I think we might need to be a bit more fluid and around what those operating hours are. Clearly, if you've got services to support, whether 24/7 or core business hours, but I think the working arrangements will need to be more fluid and adapt. I think we've already leveraged some very good tooling. I think as a result of this kind of shift to a remote first or more remote working, we should see more technology that is driving, innovation, or, Teams is starting to kind of, Zoom is a major competitor for Microsoft Teams. So we're seeing more features come out in Teams. So I think overall we should start to see more advances in technology around video conferencing and collaboration. I think for us as well is how do we maximise changes, making sure that we're aware of what's going on and measuring and feeding back and adapting our direction of travel appropriately based on those data points. And then I think I talked about the word office. For me, if you said office, or said, here's a picture of an office, it's a bank of desks and there's people there and there's whiteboards. I think maybe we'll start to move towards maybe concepts of hubs, where it's actually, rather than an office as a place I go to sit down and do my work, maybe we're moving into a place to meet and share ideas and collaborate. And perhaps where we do some of our work is going to be at home. So I'm kind of interested to see where that moves. Obviously, there's lots of benefits to a business if they can rationalise some of their property, drive savings and synergies there. So I'm interested to see kind of longer term, do we start to develop into less office, more sort of hub-based ways of working. I think we've got massive opportunity around people and culture, although I think we've got to be guarded as leaders and managers, where we need to adopt strategies that support a hybrid environment. It's crucial that we don't lose everything that we put into developing a great people and culture by having everyone remote, because by virtue of the fact there we've siloed our teams, so we need to massively avoid that. I think to maximise the change in terms of a remote first approach is really around having very, very clear communication and crucially about repeating those messages. Certainly I've found that I look after, as I mentioned, another site in Sophia. I've been probably a bit of a weakness my side previously, probably wasn't communicating as much to the guys in Sophia because I was physically in the Leeds office, but because the tooling's there, I've actually improved my multi-site communication. It's much more effective, built much better relationships with the guys in Sophia. So that to me is where you've got an opportunity, I think, to maximise this change in working practices if you're running multi-sites across different locales. And again, I think the other thing is around how we maximise change, which for me is a given anyway, is making sure you kind of celebrate successes and have fun. But I think it's hugely important that we don't lose sight of that in a hybrid world where we've got a mix of people working remote and obviously guys who are going to be physically on site. So, and then the other area for me is around, actually, is there an element of stealing a bit of competitive advantage, right? So for me, it's around adapt now and move with the times. I think history tells us those organisations which kind of slow off the mark or didn't adapt when there was kind of major changes, either from a technology point of view or socio-economic factors, that they kind of went the way of the dinosaurs or were going that way. So for me, this is pretty seismic. Unfortunately, I don't think it will be the last, whether we've got another type of pandemic in the future. Obviously, we clearly, I suspect, going to have second waves of this stuff. We've got recessions coming. So, it's a pretty bleak output. So how do we adapt now, move with the times, so that we maximise our position in going forward, that we can ultimately be resilient but versatile at the same time. And again, for me, that can be, I think, can give a competitive advantage where you've got that resiliency. For us, whatever is coming our way that is largely outside of our control, we can still produce great software, run our services. We can be versatile in terms of our agility, in terms of how we react and change course. Our processes are there, the technology and tooling is there to support it. And then I think longer term, I'm still questioning this in my mind, is around how to foster innovation and creativity. So, and I kind of touched on that in terms of, those chance encounters and fostering relationships. And so I think we've got opportunity whereby we can kind of look at those small cogs of innovation slightly differently. And again, in this kind of a mixed way of working, I think we could probably be more creative and innovative over time. So for me, I think if an organisation can kind of be successful in this new norm, whatever that new norm looks like for them, for me, it feels like there's got to be some kind of competitive advantage there. If you can get the best talent in, obviously the best talent is going to drive a lot of these things in terms of that innovation and good solid sort of technology. If my business is a tech-driven business, so hugely important there. So I guess those are the kind of topics I wanted to cover, and just thank you for being patient and listening.